Let me tell you something that most business coaches, financial advisors, and wealth consultants will never tell you, because most of them have never sat at a table with someone who actually built generational wealth. What I'm about to share with you is not a strategy from a podcast. It's not a framework from a best-selling book written by someone who made their money selling the book itself. What I'm going to give you today is a behavioral principle that has been running quietly inside Jewish households for over 3,000 years. And when you understand it, really understand it, you will look at your dinner table differently. You will look at your conversations differently. And more importantly, you will look at your bank account differently. Here's the thing that nobody tells you. Go to any Jewish billionaire's home for a Friday night dinner, Shabbat dinner. Sit at that table. Watch what happens. You will hear about family. You will hear about ideas. You will hear about learning, about values, about what one of the kids is building, about a book someone read, about a problem someone is trying to solve. You will not hear about money. You will not hear about deals. You will not hear about how much something costs or how much something made. And if a child at that table brings up money in a transactional way, as in, how much did you make, or how much does that cost, the conversation gets redirected. Every time, without exception. That is not an accident. That is a system. And today, I'm going to break that system down for you completely. By the end of this video, you will understand why wealthy Jewish families avoid money talk at the table, what they talk about instead, and why that is actually the more powerful financial conversation, the specific Talmudic principle behind this behavior, and how you can apply this to your own household and business this week to start building a different kind of wealth infrastructure. Let's go. The problem most entrepreneurs and business-minded people have is not that they don't work hard enough. It is not that they don't have the right information. The real problem, and I've seen this across hundreds of people I've worked with and mentored over the years, is that they have the wrong relationship with money at a foundational level. And that wrong relationship gets built at the kitchen table when they are children. Then it gets reinforced at the dinner table when they are adults. Then it gets passed on to their children, and the cycle repeats. Let me be very specific about what I mean. Most middle-class and even upper-middle-class families talk about money at the table in one of two ways. The first way is scarcity language. We can't afford that. Do you know how much that costs? Money doesn't grow on trees. Stop asking for things. This is the language of limitation. And when a child grows up hearing this, their brain builds a neural architecture around money that is fundamentally rooted in fear and restriction. Right now, your money is exposed. Inflation, market crashes, economic collapse. Most people lose everything when it hits. Jewish billionaire families never do. For 3,000 years, they've used one Torah system to protect and multiply wealth through every crisis. That system is now in one book. Link in the description and first pinned comment. The second way is transactional obsession. I made this much today. The market went up. I closed a deal. Did you see what that house sold for? This sounds better on the surface, but it's also problematic because it reduces wealth to numbers rather than building the thinking patterns that actually generate wealth. Neither of these conversations is the right one, and wealthy Jewish families figured this out a long time ago. Now let me bring in the Talmudic framework, because this is where it gets interesting. In Pirkei Avot, that's Ethics of the Fathers, one of the most cited tractates of the Mishnah, there is a principle that I want you to sit with. In chapter 4, verse 1, Ben Zomer asks, and then answers, "Who is rich? The one who is satisfied with his portion." Now before you tune out and say, "Okay, Rabbi, this is spiritual talk," hold on, because this is not a statement about contentment or accepting poverty. This is a strategic statement about perception management and cognitive architecture. Let me explain what I mean. Ben Zomer is not saying don't pursue more. He is saying that the person who is wealthy in mindset is the one who does not operate from a position of deficit. A person who is always calculating what they lack, who is always measuring themselves against what they don't have, is cognitively operating in scarcity mode. And here's the business application of that. People who operate in scarcity mode make worse decisions. They negotiate from weakness. They take bad deals because they feel they need the money now. They underprice their services. They hire wrong because they won't invest in the right person. They exit businesses too early because they get scared. The wealthy family knows this. So instead of building that scarcity architecture in their children, they build something else entirely. What they build at the dinner table is an architecture of ideas, values, and long-term thinking. Let me be precise about what the conversation actually looks like, because I don't want you to just hear a vague principle. I want you to be able to replicate this. At a traditional Jewish family dinner with generational wealth, the conversations center on three categories. First, problems worth solving. Someone at the table describes a problem they observed in the world, in their community, in their industry, in society, and the family discusses it. Not in a complaining way, in a dissecting way. What is the root cause? Who benefits from the problem existing? What would a solution look like? Who would pay for that solution? This is not dinner conversation. This is startup ideation. This is venture capital thinking. This is market analysis. And it is happening at a dinner table with a 10-year-old sitting there absorbing every word. Second category, principles and values applied to real situations. Someone describes something that happened to them that week. A conflict, a negotiation, a decision they had to make, and the family applies Torah principles to evaluate it. Was the right thing done? What would have been the wiser path? What does this teach us about how to operate going forward? This is moral clarity in a business context, and a child who grows up with this learns how to make decisions under pressure based on a clear internal framework rather than emotion or ego. Third category, learning and thinking. Who read something interesting? Who encountered an idea they couldn't stop thinking about? What did a teacher say that changed how they see something? Every deal you've ever lost, every salary you didn't get, every contract that fell apart, happened because you didn't have this. For 3,000 years, Jewish billionaires have negotiated with 12 Talmud tactics that nobody taught you. I put every single one in one book, the Talmud Negotiation Bible. Link in the description and first pinned comment. Get it now. This is intellectual compounding. Warren Buffett reads 5 hours a day. Charlie Munger built mental models his entire life. This behavior starts somewhere. In wealthy Jewish families, it starts at the dinner table when you are 8 years old. Now here is the retention hook I want you to hold on to as we go deeper. The dinner table is not just a place where families eat. It is a classroom, and what gets taught in that classroom determines what shows up in the bank account 20 years later. The question is not what your children are learning about money. The question is what architecture they are building inside their minds about how the world works and where they fit in it. Let me now bring in a biblical example, because I think this will make the principle land even more concretely. Let's talk about Joseph. You know the story of Joseph, or you think you do. Most people remember it as a story about betrayal and forgiveness. But I want to read it to you as a story about a man with an extraordinary mental architecture that was built long before he ever managed anything. Joseph, as described in Genesis, Bereshit, was clearly a thinker from a young age. He was a dreamer, yes, but more specifically, he was a systems thinker. When he interprets Pharaoh's dream in Genesis chapter 41, notice what he does. He doesn't just tell Pharaoh what the dream means. He immediately offers a strategic framework. 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. And without being asked, he presents a complete economic policy. Set aside 20% of the produce during the years of abundance. Appoint a wise administrator to oversee the system. Create reserves. Distribute during the crisis. This is not divine inspiration replacing strategic thinking. This is divine inspiration expressed through strategic thinking. Joseph had the mental architecture to receive that inspiration and immediately convert it into an actionable plan. That architecture was built during the years in his father's house. It was built at Jacob's table. And here is what most people miss in the Joseph story. When the famine hits and people from all over the region come to Egypt to buy grain, Joseph does not give it away. He sells it. And he is strategic about the pricing and the terms. He accumulates massive wealth for Pharaoh, yes, but in doing so, he demonstrates a complete understanding of supply and demand, crisis economics, and resource management. Joseph is running what we would today call the largest sovereign wealth fund operation in the ancient world. And he learned how to think that way, long before he had any power. That is the dinner table in action. That is what gets built in the early years that pays off decades later. Now let me go back to the Talmudic layer and give you a second reference that I think is equally important. In the tractate of Bava Metzia, which is a tractate almost entirely dedicated to business law and commercial ethics, there is an extensive discussion about ona'ah, which is the prohibition against overcharging or deceiving someone in a transaction. But the deeper teaching behind ona'ah is not just don't cheat people. The deeper teaching is about the architecture of trust in commerce. The Talmud recognized thousands of years ago that sustainable business is built on reputation and trust, not on extracting maximum value from every single transaction. This is the opposite of what most aggressive business culture teaches. Most business culture teaches you to negotiate hard, extract every dollar, and maximize short-term outcome. The Talmudic framework says, the moment you violate someone's trust, you have degraded something that cannot be rebuilt quickly. And the Jewish business networks that dominated certain industries for centuries, diamonds, banking, textiles, media, they operated on handshake deals within the community because the trust infrastructure was already built. The cost of breaking it was community exclusion. The benefit of maintaining it was access to deals, capital, and partnerships that outsiders couldn't touch. The dinner table is where that trust architecture gets built in the next generation. When you tell your children about the principles you operate by, honesty in dealing, the long-term view, the importance of your name and your word, you are building the trust infrastructure that will give them access to opportunities they cannot yet imagine. Here is your second retention hook. The dinner table conversation is not a substitute for business education. It is business education, and it is the most powerful kind because it is embedded in relationship, in repetition, and in the context of real decisions being made by real people the child trusts and looks up to. Let me now bring this into the modern world with a very specific and concrete example. The Diamond District in New York City, 47th Street, is one of the most concentrated hubs of high-value commerce in the world. Billions of dollars in diamonds change hands there every year, and for decades the industry was almost entirely run by Hasidic Jewish merchants. Here is the part that will blow your mind if you come from a conventional business background. Many of the largest transactions in that district, transactions worth hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars, were done on a handshake. No written contract, no lawyer in the room, just a handshake and the phrase "Mazelu bracha," luck and blessing. Why would sophisticated business people conducting multi-million-dollar transactions operate without a written contract? Because they understood something that most Western business culture has forgotten. A contract is a document that you reach for when you don't trust the person you're dealing with. But when you have a deep shared value system, when both parties operate by the same framework of honesty, of what it means to give your word, of what it means to violate an agreement, the handshake is actually stronger than a contract, because a contract can be litigated. A reputation cannot be restored once lost within a community that has a 3,000-year-old memory. Now, this system did not build itself overnight. It was not something those merchants learned in business school. It was something they absorbed around dinner tables for generations. It was the natural expression of the values that got embedded in their thinking long before they ever set foot in the Diamond District. The product of the dinner table conversation showed up as the handshake on 47th Street. How does this apply to you? Here is the step-by-step. First, you need to audit what is actually being discussed at your table, whether that is a literal dinner table with your family, or the metaphorical table of your team meetings, your inner circle, your business conversations with your closest partners. What is the dominant conversation? Is it about numbers in isolation? Is it about complaints? Or is it about ideas, principles, problems worth solving, and long-term thinking? That audit alone will tell you more about your financial trajectory than any profit and loss statement. Second, you need to introduce intentional conversation into your table. And I am going to give you 3 specific conversation prompts that you can use this week. The first, what problem did I notice this week that nobody seems to be solving? This shifts the brain from consumer mode to creator mode. The second, what decision did I make this week, and what principle guided it? This builds the habit of value-aligned decision-making. The third, what did I learn this week that changed how I see something? This builds the compounding intellectual habit that separates people who generate wealth from people who merely earn it. Third, and this is the one that will feel uncomfortable if you have children, stop talking about money in front of your kids as if money is the goal. Start talking about problems, solutions, value creation, and the principles you operate by. Your children should grow up knowing that you have a code, that you operate by a framework, that your word means something, that you think in decades, not months. That is the inheritance that actually builds dynasties. Money without that framework gets spent in one generation. The mindset framework builds wealth across multiple generations. Here is your third retention hook. This is the one I want you to carry out of this video. The reason Jewish billionaires don't talk about money at the dinner table is not because money is unimportant to them. It is because they understand that money is an output, and at the dinner table, they are building the inputs, the thinking, the values, the problem-solving capacity, the trust infrastructure, the intellectual hunger. These are the inputs that generate the output. Most people spend all their time talking about the output and never invest time in building the inputs. That is why most people stay exactly where they are financially, generation after generation. Let me also be direct about something that I know is in the back of your mind, because I get this question a lot. Rabbi, are you saying that Jewish people have some kind of biological or genetic advantage in business? No, absolutely not. And anyone who tells you that is either flattering you or insulting you, depending on which side of that conversation you're on. What Jewish culture has is a cultural operating system built over 3,000 years of diaspora, persecution, forced mobility, and the necessity of being able to carry your wealth in your mind rather than in land or property that could be taken from you at any moment. When you cannot own land, you invest in knowledge. When you cannot trust governments, you build community networks. When you cannot rely on institutions, you rely on your word and your reputation. These were survival mechanisms that became wealth mechanisms, and they were transmitted not through genetics, but through dinner tables, through conversations, through the way a father answered a question from his 8-year-old son about why we do business the way we do business. That is entirely replicable by anyone. That is why I am telling you this. Now let me ask you something directly, because I think this is important. What are you building at your table right now? Not your financial table, your actual table. The conversations you are having with the people closest to you. Are those conversations building the cognitive and values architecture of someone who generates wealth? Or are they building the architecture of someone who manages consumption? These are not trick questions. They are diagnostic questions. And if you sit with them honestly for 5 minutes, you will know exactly what work you need to do. Here is another question worth sitting with. If someone followed you around for a week and recorded every conversation you had about money, business, and success, what pattern would emerge? Would they see a person who thinks in systems and principles? Or would they see a person who reacts to numbers and circumstances? Because that pattern is what is being transmitted to everyone around you. Your team absorbs it. Your children absorb it. Your partners absorb it. And then they build their behavior around what they absorbed from you. One more question before I bring this home. If your business disappeared tomorrow, if every asset you currently have was wiped out, what would you still have? If the honest answer includes a rock-solid framework for identifying opportunities, a network of people who trust your word completely, and a mind trained to see value where others see problems, then you are actually wealthy. If the honest answer is just the accounts and the assets, with nothing underlying them, then you have money, but you do not yet have wealth. That distinction matters more than most people realize. Now let me close this out with exactly what I want you to take from this video and implement immediately. The principle is simple, but it is not easy. Stop having money conversations and start having value conversations. A money conversation is about numbers. A value conversation is about why the numbers exist, what principles guided the decisions that produced them, and what problems are being solved by the enterprise you are building. Jewish billionaires don't avoid money talk at the dinner table because they are modest or secretive. They avoid it because they have evolved past it. They are operating at a layer of abstraction above the money, the layer where wealth is actually created, and they are building that layer in their children through every conversation, every Shabbat dinner, every question asked and answered around that table. The Talmudic principle from Pirkei Avot is not a spiritual instruction, it is a strategic one. The person who is rich is the one who has built the internal architecture that generates wealth, regardless of external circumstances. You build that architecture through your conversations, your questions, your principles, and your long-term thinking, not through obsessing over the output. Here is what I want you to do this week. Have one intentional conversation with someone in your inner circle, a partner, a child, a co-founder, a close collaborator, where the entire conversation is about a problem worth solving and the principles that should guide how you solve it. No talk of revenue, no talk of what something costs, just, here is a problem, here is how I think about it, here is the value framework I am bringing to it. That one conversation, repeated consistently over years, is how dynasties get built. The Torah is not just a holy book. It is the oldest, most tested business manual in human history. It has been building wealth across 3,000 years and dozens of civilizations. And now you have one more page of it. If this kind of thinking is what you want more of, the real frameworks, the actual principles, the ancient strategies applied to modern business, then subscribe to this channel. Because we are just getting started, and what is coming next will go even deeper into the operating system that has outlasted every empire that ever tried to erase it.